went from being, commander of this Homeland Defense side overseas in charge of 100 guys. I was a captain in the Army, to this nobody.
It wasn't easy, Kirby.
I mean, it was just like 11, 12 years ago that I was struggling just to have enough money to buy groceries.
My job is to work myself out of a job.
What do we want our life to look like? What is the game we're playing? What are the rules that we want to play by? What are we working toward?
A lot of people are stepping over dollars to pick up nickels. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Conversations Left Behind. We've got a really cool guy on here, a friend of mine actually that I met at a couple different conferences that I think you're really going to enjoy, especially for you real estate investors or those of you who are in the grind and want to do something with real estate one way or another. So this is my friend Kirby Atwell. Kirby, how you doing, man?
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Sean.
Yeah, for sure. So Kirby has a really interesting story, and it's something that you should really lean into because you're going to see that it's, when you transition through different phases of trying to find your career, real estate, whatever it is, it's not all this rosy picture, and it's not always just the success you see at the end. Oftentimes there's a lot of challenges along the way, and we want to expose some of that. So Kirby, hey, I'm going to let you take it for a minute, but I really want to go way back and into your childhood. But before we do, just so you know, kind of give our audience just a little bit of update of where you are now, what your main thing is, and then let's talk about kind of how you transition there, because I think the story is interesting in the phases that I know that you've gone through from your military career, all the way to where you're at now. But give our audience a little bit of a taste of where you're at now.
Yeah, to your point, Sean, I think transition is the theme of my whole investing career. There's been a lot of different phases, but just to, paint a picture of where we're at now. So my wife and I feel like we're kind of living our ideal lifestyle by design at this point, which it's taken a lot of long, windy roads to get to. But today we live in Valparaiso, Indiana, and our version of lifestyle by design probably doesn't align with everyone's on here. But we live on a farm, and we just had our fourth child. So we have 4 kids, all 8 and under. And
that's a house full.
Yeah, exactly. And we always wanted a big family. And we met living in Chicago, and we realized that actually we wanted to live on a farm, and we wanted to be able to spend time with our family and not be one of the parents who have to get up before their kids wake up and come home as their kids are going to bed and never see them. And that's not the lifestyle that we wanted. And so we intentionally backward planned our way into this lifestyle we're living now. And we realized that financial freedom was going to be a big component of that because we wanted to have time with our family and also have a big impact on others. And we realized that working 40 plus hours a week at corporate jobs wasn't going to allow us to do that. And so today we get to spend a lot of time with our family, have a lot of flexibility, have autonomy, which is a huge, I think one of the most important aspects you can create, which is basically no one telling you where and when to be, where at certain places. And so you get to choose your own lifestyle. And so that's kind of what we're living today.
That's great. So, a lot of people have that dream of moving out to a farm someday and just kind of living in a rural environment, but not many make it there.
Yeah.
So it's neat to see that you've kind of worked towards that. But I love what you said. You said, because I teach this to people regularly about working backwards, and speak to that for just a minute, because I think most people miss that component. And a lot of conversations I have, people are so forward focused that they're only thinking about their next step, and they're really not thinking about, hey, what's 20 years down the road look like for you, and then start crafting it from that point backwards to really set a pattern of what has to happen to get there. Where'd that come from? Did somebody share that with you? Because most people don't start there. Somebody either told them, or maybe you're just a really smart guy. I believe that, but
that is definitely not it. Yeah, that's a great point. Because I coach people all the time, and I talk to people every week who we're talking about working together. And I always ask people who are very successful. The vast majority of people I work with have had a ton of success, are doing very well financially in their 9-to-5 jobs. And I ask them, like, what's your ideal days look like 5-10 years from now? Like, if you were living your ideal life, what would that look like? And it's kind of like this blank stare. And so I'm like, so what are you working for? Like, and they're like, well, I want to do these deals so that I can do bigger deals. So then I can get into buying a business, and then I can get into being a private investor, and then I can get into doing venture. And it's like, And then what? And it's always like one more thing to make more money. And the answer basically is what they're telling me is it's more. The answer is more. I can't tell you what my ideal life will look like, so I'm never going to know when I get there. But as long as I keep creating more and have more money and more of everything, then hopefully one day I'll just arrive at happiness. And unfortunately, that's just not how it works. And so I think for me, it was after I got married. I had been working for years, kind of working toward that version of success, like whatever I saw success look like on social media and what people told me success was, which a lot of times was material things.
Yeah.
That's kind of like it was my version of what I was working toward. I never defined it. And then once I got married, my wife and I sat down and started to plot out what do we want our life to look like? What is the game we're playing? What are the rules that we want to play by? What are we working toward? And once that got super clear, then we could make decisions so much easier. Because how do you make decisions without a very specific outcome? You're just working toward all these different kind of nebulous objectives. But once you have a specific outcome, then every opportunity, every hour that you spend on anything, it's like, is this getting me closer to my version of lifestyle by design? And if it's not, then it's the wrong decision and do something different.
Totally. I love that because you're talking about measurement. And most people don't have anything to measure their steps by or their success that they're chasing after, the goals that they're chasing after. They just go after it, and you get stuck in this ruthless grind, and you wake up one day and you're like, I'm still not there.
Yeah.
I'm still not there. And one book that I love called The Gap and the Gain, I don't know if you've ever read that, by Dan Sullivan, is really just on that topic. And what's cool about it is, and I didn't realize this till way later, so I wasn't smart enough to catch it at like your age. It was way down the path, and it was really because I'd found some success and some things that started working, after a lot of years of grind. And then I woke up and realized, the money, the toys, the things, whatever it may be, they never filled the void. It's still there. It's still there. Yeah. And so that's when that discovery phase for me went off. And now I see it in, just like you said, in other people, and they really haven't defined what that looks like. I call it your legacy target. And it just because it's so far out, it really shapes what that working backwards, working from the dots backwards that you've left behind creates the legacy for your family, or whatever it is that you really want to accomplish. So I love that. We've jumped ahead, but you already are dropping some golden nuggets, so I couldn't help it. It just kind of went there. But let's step back a little bit because you got a cool story. And what I like about it is, so first of all, tell us about, I know you were in the military, you served, by the way. Thank you for your service. It's people like you who do what you've done and sacrifice what you sacrificed that allow all of us that weren't to do what we do. So I always want to recognize folks that have served in the military that allow us the freedom that we have today. That's pretty awesome. But talk about that a little bit. I know you had a spot where, I think you spent 10, 11 years in the military, and then something clicked to where, I don't know what it is, so you're going to share it with us if you don't mind. What clicked that changed, like, hey, I got to do something different, or was it just transitioning out? Was it, what was that?
Yeah.
What did that look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I had a little bit of the rich dad, poor dad experience growing up in my household. So, my dad worked for the Parks and Rec department. He was the director of a park district. So a city job, government, pay like 1st and 15th of every month, like the, very secure position. And then my mom started her own insurance brokerage from scratch, and just,
nice.
Built it from the ground up. And so I got to see kind of the juxtaposition of those two different types of lifestyles. And I was always really drawn to my mom's business because not that I loved insurance, but I was like, she can work as hard as she wants and make literally as much as she wants. And I saw my dad as like, it was capped, it was like, no matter how hard he works, if the guy, down the hall from him is working, half as hard, they're still kind of getting their same pay scale every month. So, so I was really drawn to entrepreneurship and like, if I create something and build my own, what does that look like? But I knew I wanted to serve in the military as well. So I joined the military knowing it wasn't going to be a lifelong career, but it was something I wanted to do. And so I went to West Point after high school, became an officer, and I did 6 years. And then that's when I actually read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad and kind of saw a similar experience in that book where he,
6 years in?
This was actually right out of West Point. So it was about a year out of West Point. I read it. This was in 2006. I graduated in 2005. And I was just like, man, this is what I want to do the rest of my life. I want to do real estate, even though it's not a real estate book technically. It's a personal finance book, but it really makes so many people see the I guess, the benefit of buying assets. And so after that, in 2011 is when I decided to get out. I had served 6 years as an officer in the Army. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to go into this full time. I'm going to be a successful real estate investor. Had no idea what I didn't know at the time.
Right.
Got out, jumped straight into it, moved home from overseas, had appointments to see properties lined up from overseas, like as soon as I got home. And I just jumped into it, and I thought, this is just going to work out great. I'm going to be so successful. And I struggled like crazy. I moved into my parents' basement, went from being, commander of this Homeland Defense side overseas in charge of 100 guys. I was a captain in the Army, to this nobody trying to get my business started, telling people I'm a real estate investor who's never done any deals. And I think a lot of people can probably relate to that when they're getting started. That feeling of feeling like a fraud, like you're like, oh, I'm a real estate investor, but don't ask me about my track record,
Right. I haven't done much yet, but I am.
Yeah,
I am.
yeah, exactly.
You're claiming it.
Yeah. So eventually, after about a year, I started doing deals. I partnered with a couple friends, and then we started on flips because we were like, financing wasn't available. I no longer had a 9-to-5 job. Just seems like flips are a good way to make money. And so we started doing one, and then we started doing multiple at the same time, and then more and more, and then we got an office, and we started hiring a staff and doing all this off-market marketing, and built like this mini call center in our office. And to the outside world, we looked really successful. We had a lot of before and after really sexy pictures on social media. We were doing a lot of deals, but man, it was a grinder. We had created basically a giant treadmill, because everything that we kept making, we kept putting back into the business to try to grow it. And your projections are kind of all over the place. It's different from the actuals in a lot of cases.
Right.
And we just kept adding more overhead, so we had to do more deals every month to pay the bills, and it was all transactional based. There was no assets that were paying us income long term.
Right.
And so I did that for 5 years and flipped about 70 houses before I realized this is not going to get me to financial freedom and give me a lifestyle by design, and that's when I pivoted.
Wow. So that's a big move, just going from having the prestige or the responsibility of commander to now living with mom and dad and trying to find a route to start a whole new career, essentially.
Yeah, very humbling.
So here's what's interesting. It seems like, and tell me if this is your experience too, but most people that I talk to in real estate, and both of us, so we'll bounce around to different real estate conferences and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. The people that I talk to, everybody seems to want to go into the flip first. If I could just flip homes, I want to flip homes.
Yes.
I want to meet wholesalers. And I think it's because there's this kind of sexy picture, that we've learned from TV and social media and some of these shows of flipping homes is just, it's so much fun and everything else. But it's not always that fun. It's a lot of work. I mean, it's kind of, you can enjoy it. I did enjoy that in the day. Mm-hmm. But I tell people now, I'd rather build new construction all day long than do a renovation, because you open up a wall and there's $3,000 I didn't expect. Just the things that show up that you can't see on an inspection, whatever else. But most people go into that. So when you were there, you finally realized, it sounds like, hey, you weren't really loading the bank account the way most people think happens from flips. But you were scaling your business, because like any business, it's still a business, right? Mm-hmm. And if you're going to grow it, you have to pour into it and nurture that business, eat, drink, sleep it, and dump a lot of money into it.
Yeah.
And most people don't see that side. They think it's just you sell a property, you made a bunch of money, and woohoo, it's off to the races. So that had to be quite an awakening, but I think that's a really good point, because, again, a lot of people, that's their first thought when they think about, or they have the desire to go into real estate, it's, I want to flip homes. And I always say, hey, flipping is an income. It's not wealth building. It's not an investment. It's just an income. Absolutely. So it's no different than your day job or anything else. You're selling your time. So I think most people who have done it long enough start transitioning into other wealth building assets. So what did that look like for you?
Yeah, and to your point, I think the allure of it is, you see like, I can make 30 or 40,000 in one hit, as opposed to, a few $100 or $1,000 a month. Like, that's not as sexy, and so
not at all.
But that you don't realize, it takes you 6-9 months to get to that 30, 40,000. Meanwhile, you burn through that much in overhead, and so you're back to square one. And what I tell people is, I'm the same way. I like doing a flip, opportune here and there, like when you come across it, but that's very different than having to do 4 or 5 flips a month just to pay the bills and maintain your business. So for me, I realized that what got me so interested in Rich Dad Poor Dad in the beginning was not this idea of transactional work for the rest of my life and being on this giant treadmill with tons of stress. It was financial freedom. It was recurring income that would show up. And so so initially I decided, you know what, I'm done flipping. My partners want to continue to flip. I said, God bless you. You can keep the business and continue to run it, and I'll just start over from scratch. And so I did. I started over from scratch with my first long-term rental property. Initially, I was renting them to homeless veterans through the HUD-VASH program, which is similar to like a Section 8 program, but it's just for homeless veterans. And it worked really well in the south suburbs of Chicago. And then we moved to Northwest Indiana, and we bought this house that was all original 1970s inside. And we decided, you know what, we're going to renovate this for us to live in, but it had this walkout basement. And I kept hearing, this was 2017, I kept hearing about people doing short-term rentals and this new Airbnb thing that's kind of taken off. And so I was like, what if we just try this in our basement and convert our basement into a one-bedroom apartment and put it on Airbnb and see what happens? Worst case scenario, we could rent it as a long-term rental. So we felt like it was very little risk, and we did that, and we listed it just before summer that year, and we made over $22,000 that first summer. And I was like, I had this epiphany moment of like, okay, I don't make $22,000 on a lot of my long-term rentals in a whole year, and I just made it on this basement with no windows and just in the summertime. So I realized, okay, there's something to this, and that's when I started to scale these more affordable. First, it was single family, but then I realized if I bought small multi-unit properties that are all short-term rental units within it, that really exponentially increases the net cash flow. And so we started buying these really high cash flowing small multi-unit short-term rentals then.
I love that. So, a lot of people are stepping over dollars to pick up nickels, and they don't ever really realize you have to pivot or look for other product. I think a lot of times just because they're stuck on the hamster wheel, kind of what you were talking about. But I always teach some of the greatest opportunities for growth is to get clarity, which oftentimes means you have to separate yourself from your environment. Say, okay, what am I doing? Let's reassess everything. I love, like Steve Jobs says, he talks about reflection. He says the only way to do that is by looking at the dots that you've left behind, because there's nothing forward yet. You're planting those as you go.
Yeah.
And that reflection kind of helps you see, okay, what have I been doing? What's my life been feeling like? Because oftentimes some of the people that I work with, they're in that grind, and they're at the point where sometimes their family life struggles. I mean, there's a sacrifice somewhere, right? Hopefully people manage it well enough. My path was I did not manage it so well. Now, by the grace of God, I've been married 31 years, and God's blessed my marriage, but it wasn't easy, Kirby.
Yeah.
It wasn't easy, and I didn't do it the right way. I went all in on the business, and so I sacrificed and left a trail of carnage behind because of that. But I love that you said you basically had to reassess and then make a new game plan to step into the next thing, and that's really where success comes from that I see, is when you stop for a moment, pause, shut all the noise down, and say, hey, what am I doing? Is this working or not? And most people just stay in that circle, and they literally just chew themselves up with it. So
exactly,
that's a great point. So you moved into a different product. How did you? So a lot of people, and I get this question often: How do I transition out of single family homes? I started that way too, single family homes. It's been a blessing to me, but there's obviously other things there, and some things that will accelerate your success or your investing or your goals. What was it that said, okay, or how did you come up with the understanding that if I buy multifamily, I can make X amount, or what was the formula that just kind of made all this come to fruition for you, or just kind of the light bulb moment that went off to really understand it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Just before I get to that, I think I'd like to back up a little bit. And, it was just like 11, 12 years ago that I was struggling just to have enough money to buy groceries. I mean, when we were flipping houses, literally everything was going back in, and we would just kind of pull a little bit from the business to survive on, and you felt like you were robbing the business because there was just never enough. It was all transactional based, and it wasn't sustainable. And so, to your point, like being able to just stop then. So many people either run businesses or in jobs where they're not being able to keep up with their life and their bills, and they're in debt, and instead of continuing to do the same thing that has gotten you to this point, being able to stop and reinvent yourself, I think, is so important. And I think that was a good lesson I learned from transitioning out of the military, and that allowed me to build this seemingly very successful business, and was getting a lot of praise from other people and saying, I'm just going to start over from scratch, again, even after spending the last 5 years building this business.
Yeah.
And so, but that was so critical. And in buying that first rental property, all of a sudden I had $500 to $700 of net cash flow coming in after my expenses. And I was so excited. I remember, because I was like,
Pretty cool.
yeah, I was like, this is going to keep coming in, and I can just stack these, and it's not going to be overnight get rich quick. But I look back at that point, I mean, that was like 2000, that was about a decade ago. And now I could never have imagined that we'd be having the type of income that we have now from our properties a decade later, just by slowly, consistently adding more and more properties. Initially it was long-term, and then it transitioned into short-term. And so that kind of gave me the bug to say, okay, how can I optimize properties to even bring in more cash flow? Because I realized cash flow was the key. That was what was going to give me freedom. Because I went back and got a corporate job while I was starting to build rental properties, because I needed money to survive off of and take care of my family. So I started adding more properties. We did the one in my basement. We did a couple of small single-family homes, short-term rentals, where I was like, we're just going to test this out. If this doesn't work, then I know these will work as long-term rentals as a backup plan. And they worked phenomenally as short-term rentals. We were making about $1,000 to $1,500 a month of net cash flow on those properties. Pretty affordable, small single families. But then we came across this 2-unit that was just nasty and had, way too many tenants living in there for way too long, all this deferred maintenance, and the landlord just wanted to get rid of it. So we got it for, it was $26,000, so what we bought it for, in Michigan City, Indiana. And I was like, I don't know if this could ever work as a short-term rental, but we're going to rehab it in worst case scenario. Again, we'll rent it as long-term. And then we started renting it out as a short-term after we put about $100,000 into it. And it has brought in consistently $65,000 per year every single year since then, on this little just over $100,000 2-unit property. And I realized the net cash flow on that, because the expenses are so low and there's multiple streams of income coming in on this property, the net cash flow was so much higher, and so
let's keep doing that.
Exactly. And that's when we started, okay, let's replicate this. And so we did several more 2 units. We have houses with, an ADU in the back. Like any project, we just did a 5-unit where it looks like a big Victorian, but it's 5 separate 1-bedroom apartments in this house that we rent out individually, and we can rent out the whole place together. And by doing that, having these multiple streams of income that are elevated income because it's short-term rental income, when you look at the net cash flow, especially on more, cost-effective properties, it's just off the charts compared to any other investment that I see out there.
That's crazy. I see what you mean, but to have a $65,000 income coming in off of a roughly $100,000 property, I mean, everybody would die to have something like that. I mean, those are fantastic numbers.
Yeah.
Here's a question that I hear oftentimes. Well, the management is so extensive to deal with short-term rentals. How do you do that? Do you self-manage, or do you have companies? Because I know you now own properties in multiple states, so obviously you're not there managing them. But what does that look like for the viewer who's sitting here thinking, man, I'd love to do that. I've always had an interest in doing that, but I just can't wrap my mind around all the craziness of management, what that looks like.
Yeah, it's funny because I talk to people who own 2 or 3 properties, short-term rentals, and they're like, this is horrible. Like, my life is consumed by this. I have guest calls all the time. It's just... And we have 39 short-term rental listings right now. We're adding another property. It's three units. We'll have 42 units after that. But it is it's way easier than when we had one. And I tell that to people, and they're like, "There's no way. You're lying." And if you think about it, so what we did is we started in the basement, our basement unit, and my wife was cleaning the property in between guests. We were responding to all the guests. We were taking all the bookings. It was all us because we didn't know anything at the time. We were just figuring it out as we went. And then we kind of kept that same system. We hired a few cleaners, but as we added a few more properties, we kept that same system. And we thought they have to be right down the road because if anything goes wrong, I got to be the one that goes there. And it was always Friday night when an older couple would check in. They couldn't figure out the digital lock, and I'd drive over there and then have to get them on Wi-Fi, and it would like ruin my Friday nights. And eventually, after a year of being my own worst enemy, I said to myself, okay, there's people who are doing this at scale, and they're doing it well. And so if I was on the other side of the world, how would I treat this property? What would I do differently? And so I started treating them as if they weren't down the street. They were on the other side of the world. And I realized I needed a few key people, boots on the ground, and checklists for absolutely everything that could come up that they're responsible for. And then we did all the remote aspects until we got to 4 or 5, like took the bookings, we set the pricing, we created the listings, all that stuff. And then at 4 or 5, we realized, okay, we could bring on a part-time VA to do some of these aspects, these remote aspects, and that could take off some of that load as well. And so instead of paying 25% to a property manager and just assuming it's too complex, handing it to them, and usually the quality drops off quite a bit because they're managing 100 of these properties.
Right.
We used our own VA to do all the remote aspects, and then the boots on the ground team to do all the boots on the ground activities. And so then all of a sudden it could scale. And so we started adding more and more, and now we have 4 full-time VAs, and they're Filipino-based, and they are phenomenal, speak perfect English. They're they understand the nuances of guests. Our guests think they're right down the street, and they bring them a cup of sugar if they wanted. They have no idea they're in the Philippines. And they just do a fantastic job. And literally, they hire the cleaners, they screen them all, they take all the bookings, they answer all the guest questions, send the check-in instructions, line up the handyman, the pest control, like every aspect of day-to-day they do. And we have a report on Slack after each shift where they report out what's going on so we can stay on top of it and know what's going on. But I can be on this call with you on a day where there might be 15 check-ins, and it's not consuming my life at all. It's all about the system. It's not what the activity is. It's just, do you have the right system to manage that activity?
I love that. That's fantastic, because that's where so many people get stuck, is they're wearing all the hats. And when you start a business, it's inevitable. You're going to wear all the hats. You just have to, because there is nobody to pay. There's no income yet, and all the things that
and I think that's good to do that in the beginning, because you learn so much. Don't try to skip that.
100%. And so then we end up with this fear of delegation, and it's really because usually it's the founder, and they're wearing the founder hat, and they've got this perfectionist attitude, and there's no trust or of somebody else, and you want control because you're so used to handling everything. But it's funny, because I always tell people, at some point, if you're doing things well, you get to a point in that vertical where those hats now all have to be given away. And the goal becomes, how could I not wear any hats at all?
Yeah.
And it's funny, because I know it usually makes everybody a little anxious when I say that. They're like, ooh, oh no.
Yes.
A friend of mine, Dan Martell, says it like this. He says, 80% done by somebody else is 100% awesome.
Yes.
And I love it. And it's so true. And it was actually my greatest route to freedom, is when I kind of broke that perfectionist attitude and started letting go. Mm-hmm. And like you're talking about, hiring some VAs, creating a system so it removes you. My greatest moment of freedom was when I realized my job is to work myself out of a job. And basically, everybody that I can train, when something comes across my dusty desk, it's dusty because I'm not there much, what happens is I look at it, and it's now a red flag to me to say, hey, why am I doing this? Why do I not have somebody who knows this yet? And it gives me the signal of, this is something that needs to be taught to this person, that person, whoever it is, and I pass it on. These days, I come into one of the companies that I manage, and I check in here and there, and they're like, hey, how's it going? I'm like, you need anything from me? No, not really. I'm like, okay. So it feels a little bit like I want to be needed, but I have to wrap my mind around, because I still have some of that old founder's hat that kind of wants to stay on my head. But I think the true route to freedom, and you just described it, which is, again, what you said, why you get to sit here today, in the morning, and we get to have this chat to try to pour into others and give them a little inspiration, is just that, because you learn to pass it out and delegate, which is where the true freedom comes from. So that's fantastic. So you've got this system now, you recognize it, and you scaled. And this is where most people, I think, never really go to that next level, because they're scared of the VAs, they're scared of letting something go, and they feel like they really need to be in the know of everything. What do you say to those people who are stuck at that spot right there?
Well, that was me. I mean, you might hear, what the business looks like now, and think, oh yeah, you're just, you were trained as a military officer, and so you're just used to delegating. That was what I always struggled with, is delegating. I felt like it was a weakness. If anyone can do it, I should be able to do it. And if I handed it off, I'd been burned in the past, especially with VAs. Like in the beginning when I started my business, I read The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss and thought, okay, this is great. I'm just going to hire out all these VAs, and it was a disaster. Like what I realized is hiring for tasks and hiring for ownership and responsibility are two very different things. And so I was hiring for tasks and hoping they would take ownership of stuff, and they would just come back to me and say, what's the next task? And if I didn't explain every single step, then it was done wrong. But now what we do is we find really high talented people, which even if it's an overseas VA, there's such a spectrum of talent out there that it doesn't have to be like the Verizon call center person who's just reading off a script. Like, I hired them with the expectation right up front, saying, there were certain requirements, like you had to have certain number of years managing short-term rentals before to understand nuances of it. You had to speak perfect English. So that eliminated a lot of people who didn't fall in that category. And then I said, I'm going to be very busy because I'm coaching other people on how to do this, and I love that aspect. I love having a big impact on others, and if I have to be sucked back into this all the time for the day-to-day stuff, it's not going to be possible. So I need someone who's going to take ownership of this and make decisions. And in the beginning, I'll be available. I'm going to answer all your questions. We're still going to have weekly calls forever. But day to day, we're not going to be like, on calls all day long, and I'm going to explain to you what to do next. And so that was a very different conversation. That made all the difference in the world. And so I'd say, start with one aspect at a time and do it, because it can be scary to outsource that. And it still is for me. It's still a struggle. There's certain aspects I know I should outsource, and I hold back, probably longer than I should. But at the same time, like, you're not in a race. So, just start with one aspect, outsource it, then do another. And it's amazing how 3, 4, 5 years from now, you look up and you're like, wow, this business, like, there's so many components that operate by themselves that back in the day, I never could have even imagined that could be the case.
Yeah. So you said something that I think is really important, and I think a lot of people miss. I know a lot of people miss is hire quality people. And I went through that same route, man. So I get it, because you're always trying to conserve cash.
Yep.
You're always trying to do things for the least amount of money, because it's now an overhead that you're going to continue to pay, especially hiring a new employee. And so many people have the same mindset. I have a friend who runs a business, and we were having a conversation, and he's just that guy. He's always trying to get the cheapest of everything. And you can see when you look in, now, I always say it's easier to read the label on a bottle from the outside looking in than the inside looking out. You can see clearly, I'm like, man, your biggest bottleneck is because you want to save a dime, but you're spending $1 because the quality's so bad in the people that you're hiring. They're not equipped. It's not that they're bad people, they're just not equipped for that role. And it's the wrong people because they're too cheap. So you're trying to train them to do everything instead of somebody that already comes with a skill set. In my experience, the payoff is far more valuable, and it sounds like you're saying the same thing, is to hire the right person the first time, put the right person in the right seat, and they will then make you money instead of you constantly shelling out money and having to babysit or micromanage them.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think your buddy who you grew up with, Chris, turned me on to this. I had a conversation with him at the conference where we met, and he was telling me about his VAs and what was possible with hiring really great people, and they were running his whole business. And it was like this, my eyes open. And I think this is one of the reasons why, it's beneficial to go to conferences sometimes, is you just walk away with just a conversation you have like that. And then I started looking and realizing, I could do the same thing with my business. And so you just don't even realize what's possible sometimes, because you get caught up in the mindset of, I know it already. This is what's possible. This is how VAs work, or this is how any aspect of your business works. And sometimes it requires you to step back and just take a different perspective.
Yeah, I love that. That's good stuff. So let's move forward. So now you've kind of worked through some of the efficiencies and built a process, and now you're at the point where, and I know this about you, so, and you've mentioned it a couple times, so just audience, if you don't know this yet, so Kirby has programs and systems that he teaches now to help other people do this. One of the things I will say on that note, I caught your presentation in Tennessee at that event we were both at recently, and I love that you put up the people who have been successful in your program, who jumped in and took action, and you were highlighting them. And I believe there were quite a few of them there, were they not?
Yeah, a lot of them. I didn't realize they were going to come, and then they found out about the conference and showed up, and we got to meet in person.
That's super cool. But what I'm getting at is you've developed a system that now you share with others to help them be successful. But it's not the same as everybody's system. You have something that you talk about regularly called the 1% rule. Can you share a little bit about what that is? Because everybody's like 1%, 2%. Everybody's always throwing these out for flips and all different kinds of numbers. Help us understand how you came to this and what that looks like.
Yeah. So, you're right. The traditional 1% rule that I think a lot of people are familiar with, that, if you read Bigger Pockets, they talk about it all the time, is the rule for buying long-term rentals. And it's basically, if you're buying a property for, say, $300,000, it needs to rent for $3,000 a month, run 1% of the purchase price. And that generally is a good rule of thumb, that it's going to have some level of cash flow after you subtract out all the expenses. And that's what a lot of people use as a gauge to buy long-term rentals. And what I realized is once we got into short-term rentals, the cash flow is so much higher that I came up with this 1% net rule of thumb, because I didn't care about what the gross income was. I didn't care about the monthly rent was, because you're going to have to subtract out all your expenses anyway. And all I cared about was what was left over that I could live off of. So I came up with the 1% net. So if I'm buying a property for $300,000, it needs to have a net cash flow after my mortgage, taxes, insurance, my cleaner fee, my utilities, my lawn care, absolutely everything, $3,000 a month of net cash flow. And so I tell that to people, and immediately people, especially if they've been investing in long-term rentals, are like, "You're out of your mind. That's ridiculous. Like, there's no possible way. There's deals out there like that." And we're buying them all the time. Members of our program are buying them all the time, because if you buy the right small multi-unit, we can buy a turnkey 3-unit in our target markets for $300,000. And so if you think about 3 units worth of income as short-term rentals, that could generate $7,000 a month. And so then if you have $4,000 of expenses between your mortgage, taxes, insurance, and the cleaners and all that other stuff, you're left over with $3,000 a month of net cash flow. And so I came up with this rule of thumb because it makes every other metric way off the charts, and it also keeps you aligned with the purchase price, because I don't want to buy a $3 million property that only generates $3,000 a month. That's not the same thing. It's always commiserate with the purchase price and how many dollars I have to invest in the deal. So your cash on cash is going to be, typically we're between 30 and 40% cash on cash return. Your ROI, your IRR, whatever metric it is you use, as long as you follow this 1% net, you're going to be in a very, very good position.
That's really interesting, and I know it's kind of hard to digest sometimes, because everybody thinks, well, first of all, it's hard to assess. It's harder to assess the income coming in from short term versus a long term, where you just set it and forget it, and it's super easy. There's comps all over. So for the person who's like, gosh, I get it, Kirby, but how the heck do I figure that out? Just give a small segment without giving away all your candy that would speak to somebody to help them understand, hey, this is probably not as hard as you think.
Yeah. To your point, it feels safer to do a long-term rental because you get the same income every month. But is it safer to get a much lower ROI just because it's consistently the same amount, even though overall you'd make way more with a short-term rental, even though it might be seasonal? You're still on an annual basis making, in a lot of cases, 4 or 5 times as much. So the way to identify where these 1% net properties are is we typically start with the part of the country that's on sale. So the Midwest and Southeast, where the price per square foot is pretty affordable, but there's a lot of population. So you don't want to go out to the middle of nowhere, but if you look at one of the most affordable parts of the country is the Rust Belt, which we're both living in, this Midwestern area that was a lot of old industrial towns that have a ton of multi-unit stock, and there happens to be some of the highest population concentration as well. So anywhere where there's a high population, there's people traveling for leisure and non-leisure travel. They're visiting family, they're getting married, they're going to funerals, they're traveling for work because there are cities nearby. So we buy typically just outside the cities where the regulation is much easier to live within. We're buying these small multi-units that are really affordable. And because there's population, the nightly rate and occupancy is often still really high in a lot of these markets. And so that's kind of like the perfect combination of factors that lead to this 1% net type of deal.
It's really interesting because, and myself included, whenever I think short-term rentals, I always think, you need to be on a coastline, you got to have a big demand of, Disney World or some big attraction that's got to be nearby. Mm-hmm. But what's so unique about what you're saying is that it sounds like you're just more targeting the traveler who's just coming in and out of a populated area, who maybe, I think you mentioned it, visiting family or whatever else. So you're not even looking for like the major attractions in your process. Is that right? Right?
Yeah. So the keys are just to be within driving distance to big population. So within an hour of a larger city, typically.
So like a metro.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay. But not in the metro, because we can buy for $300,000 what would be $1 million. For us downtown Chicago. So we're an hour outside of Chicago. Then have some local draws. So, you don't want to just buy in the middle of nowhere, but have some reasons why people travel there. So some of them might be, like a traveling sports facility for kids where constantly parents are booking places to stay, museums, outlet mall. We've got a casino nearby. There's water park, stuff like that. So, these attractions. And then also on top of that, because you just happen to be close to population, there's going to be non-leisure reasons that, especially in the off season, we get a lot of midterm bookings for 30 plus day stays for contractors in town or workers in town for work. And so, you can capitalize on all these different reasons that people travel as opposed to just the high-end beachfront vacation. And that's the only reason someone's ever going to stay at that property.
Yeah, I love that because that's so unique. You don't usually hear that. It's usually the opposite of what I was mentioning of having some big draw. And then everybody's looking for this and they're saying, well, it's just not attainable because often those are significantly more expensive as well. So that's super cool. Love that. So that's a lot of information that some of these people listening now should be encouraged by because, man, what it's saying is anybody can get into this game. But number one, you've got to build some systems and you've got to change your mindset, which is always a big one. That's the majority of what I have conversations with people is more mindset related because it kind of encompasses everything that stops them from fears of ever stepping into anything oftentimes outside of what they're used to and comfortable with. So that's awesome. You've really given an enormous amount of information that you've shared just to kind of help understand what that looks like. Here's the big question. Okay, 10 years. That's a short timeline, man. So congratulations, good for you. That's not a big timeline. That should be super encouraging as well for our audience to understand. 10 years, you've gone from not much and trying to buy groceries to stable, comfortable, and abundance. Those are some significant shifts in 10 years worth of work or application. What's life look like now? So for the people who say, okay, Kirby, 10 years ago, you were struggling, to buy groceries. Now life looks like this, and anybody can do this if they apply some of these principles. So what's it look like now? What is it that's changed that brought you the freedom that you're looking for in your life that somebody else could probably see or hear and say, I want that. That's what I'm aiming for. I just never really understood a pathway to get there.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's funny because actually we got to a place of autonomy and owning our days way before 10 years, actually. So we like I said, started this journey about 10 years ago with rental properties. And at the time, I went and got a corporate job. I was working downtown Chicago, so commuting from where we were living out here in Northwest Indiana, and started to build up this portfolio. And once we discovered the short-term rentals, that's when I was like, okay, each unit is bringing in about $1,000 a month. So if we can get to 8 units, I'll feel comfortable leaving my full-time job, and it's not the end state, but it'll be enough to support us that we could live off that.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did in 2021. So about 5 years ago, I put in my notice because we got to our 8th unit and took the leap. And what I realized that a lot of people don't understand who have never gone, got to a place of financial independence, is that now we had 40 hours a week freed up for the rest of our lives.
It's a long time.
Yeah, and I was 39 at the time, so I was doing the math, and I was like 40 hours a week times 52 times, next 25 working years that I would have owed to somebody else just to have enough money to live off of. I get all that back. That was 52,000 hours, I think, is what I calculated, of time that I would have owed to somebody else.
Wow.
That now I can choose what to do with it. And so, you're obviously going to have a lot more time with family and to do things that you really love, but also at the same time, we could add some more deals, too, at a pace that was very easy to manage, but each one just adds more and more cash flow coming in. And so we went from 8 units to now we have, like I said, 39 listings total, and we're working on the next project right now, and we just do kind of 1 or 2 at a time, and it gives us a huge amount of flexibility in our schedule. And so with 4 kids, obviously that's kind of nice to have.
Right.
And we, just from those properties, we're making well over $1 million a year of income. And because they're low cost properties, a lot of that is actually profit. It's cash flow as opposed to making $1 million a year of, just like it's all leveraged and there's nothing left over. So it gives us a very nice lifestyle. And then at the same time gives me a ton of time to work with other people. And I've worked with hundreds over the last 5 years to share the same step-by-step process to create the same type of cash flow from these deals. And it's been some of the most fulfilling work I've done because people come back all the time and say, man, this literally changed my life. I couldn't have done the things that I'm doing now had I not discovered how to create cash flow that didn't depend on my time, which
Yeah.
is huge.
I love that. Yeah. So, and it's hard to help everybody understand this oftentimes, especially if they're in the early phases or in their 20s or sometimes even in their 30s, because they're not thinking on a time basis. They're thinking they have plenty of time. Then all of a sudden you hit the big 4-0 and you're like, ooh, just got a little short. And then some of us hit the 5-0 and you're like, whoa, what's going on now? But yeah, it really is. And it's that time freedom where everything changes. So I love that you've recognized that. That's super cool. I'm going to ask you a question. And outside of the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and although as ironic as it is that almost everybody I bump into, you, myself, and many friends of mine, and many investor friends of mine, even if it's not investing in real estate, investing in some type of asset class, all have read that book.
Yeah.
So it was impactful. But I would make the assumption now that so many people have read it. What would be your next book that you would recommend that was really impactful on you that maybe the audience would enjoy as well?
Oh man, there's so many good ones that I've read recently. You mentioned Dan Martell. I read Buy Back Your Time
that's a good one.
last year or the year before when it came out, and man,
Yeah.
phenomenal. You mentioned Ben Hardy too, so he wrote The Gap in the Gain, which I have not read, but I did read 10X is Better Than 2X, which is phenomenal. Not the Grant Cardone type of 10X. It's
Right.
a little different. So
I
don't
think
let the
that was Dan
title.
Sullivan's coaching
Yes.
program as well with Ben Hardy, maybe.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So
Okay.
the two of them together co-authored that book. And then one that I always go back and read it's called Effortless by Greg McCune. And the premise of the book, he talks a lot about residual versus linear effort. And so a lot of people don't distinguish between the two. But since reading that book, it just makes me think about it all the time, every time I'm doing something. And so linear effort is when you do something and you get rewarded for it one time. It's a linear result that you get, and then you're back to square one, kind of like what I was doing with flipping. But residual effort pays you over and over again for that one bit of effort up front. So I started thinking through the lens of how can I create residual results in everything that I'm doing? And when you start doing that, all of that starts to stack on itself and starts to compound. And so you add a property, and that's residual results going forward. That a really solid cash flowing rental property, and then you can add another one on top of that, and and so you do that, and with relationships and with coaching and all that stuff, these are residual results that you don't always know exactly what the reward is going to be, but you're building something that's going to pay off over and over again long term. And so yeah, that's a good one that I would highly recommend reading.
Yeah, I love that. That's there's a lot of books obviously I haven't read, but I'm an avid reader and I have an extensive library that I'm super proud of.
Yeah.
And I've never heard of that one, so I'm going to have to check that out myself and see what it's all about.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Well, man, as we kind of land the plane here, first off, thank you. You've really poured into all the people who are sitting on the outside who are going to watch this. It's usually entrepreneurs, business owners, and real estate investors that are our primary audience. And they're the people in the grind. They're the people looking for something to escape, maybe their corporate or their current grind. And these are the types of things, and these are the inspirational conversations that shows somebody who's done it, who has credibility, and says, hey, if I can do it, you can too. It just takes a few steps in the right direction, and you can find freedom. So I love that. Now, the big thing here, because people are going to be like, hey, how do I find this Kirby guy? That was a great conversation. I want to know more. So tell the audience where they can find you specifically so they can connect with you if this resonates and they want to jump in to learn more about you.
Yeah, so my platform is called Living Off Rentals. So I started this back with a podcast initially, and it was just me talking about what I was doing. And my mom was my one listener, and I appreciate her tuning in to that first episode. And now there's several 100,000 downloads later. I just have released a weekly episode ever since for the last 5.5 years. So Living Off Rentals that is a YouTube channel too. That weekly I put out a how-to video on what I'm doing, or an example deal or case study, so you can go to Living Off Rentals there. I did a web class, livingoffrentals.com/start, and that walks you through just the step-by-step of how I think about things, my strategy, and example deals there as well. So if you want just kind of an hour-long overview of exactly how my strategy works, you can go to there. So livingoffrentals.com/start.
That's fantastic. Well, man, Kirby, it's been great hanging out with you. I appreciate your time, and thank you for pouring into our audience. I'm sure that someone's going to be excited to hear some of this. I'm excited. It was new information for me, not my forte, but who knows? Maybe we'll do now, because I got a buddy.
It works in St. Louis, you know, so
It
just so
works
you know.
in St. Louis, yeah. So I have, you know, the funny thing is, there's not a lot of, so some of the pockets where there's good multifamily, they're not in the greatest areas. So that's some of the challenges that I've seen in St. Louis, but I've never really hunted for that product. We bounced from, you know, single family into some commercial and some different products from there, lending, just all kinds of different stuff. You know, it just keeps going, but this is really interesting. So thank you, man. I appreciate you. Thank you for sharing and hopping on and giving the information to our audience. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sean. Really appreciate it.
You bet. We'll see you next time.